Okay. Let us light up the darkness. Let's see who's going to tune in first. This should be the last show from this trip to the nation's capital. Had a very successful round of advocating for the beautiful friendship between America and Israel up on Capitol Hill. Met with several of our congressmen. It was a terrific experience. And now I have just enough time, thanks to a late checkout here at this hotel. I give credit to the Westin. I'm at the Westin at 14th and M Street for giving me this late checkout so that I can teach this shiur, this Daf Yomi class, before I head out to the airport. Who's in the house? Where are you tuning in from? Iris Katz is first. Hello, Iris, tuning in from Las Vegas. Great to have you with us. Karen Cohen, prayers and blessings from Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people. So good to have you tuning in from around the world. This is so cool. All right. We are really in the home stretch now of our journey through the first tractate of the Talmud, Berachos. We are holding on page 61 of 63. We're in chapter 9. We've been talking about blessings for specific situations. But as we're nearing the end of the tractate, you can almost feel that our sages want to, just sort of slip in a few extra bits of wisdom, a few more understandings of what is a life well lived. It's right at the beginning of our journey through the Talmud, and yet there's this sense that like the volume is ending. We're going to be making a siyum soon, right? A ceremony closing our journey through this first tractate. But because there's so much, there's been so many teachings in this volume about our relationship with God, the sort of, the approach to life, right? What is a life well lived? What is a soul? Why are we here? We won't always encounter so much philosophy, as it were, about our place in the universe, our mission being sent here. That as we're coming to the end of the volume, it's like, our sages want to just pack in a little bit more knowledge. It's not so much, the rules and regulations of specific prayers and blessings, but more this, what's it all about, right? The bigger questions. So let's just jump in. Here on page 61, near the beginning, we have a dispute over actually the creation of woman. Or really it's the creation of human, right? The human. And it says in Genesis that God formed the human. And the word that's used is vayitzer, right? Vayitzer. And it's spelled wrong. Of course, there's no misspelling in the Torah. So when we find an alternative spelling for a word, our sages will pay very, very close attention, right? It's not a misspelling, it's a variant spelling. And so when it says that God formed the human, vayitzer, it's spelled with an extra yud. It should have one yud, the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and instead it has two yuds, right? It still sounds like vayitzer. You could say vayitzer, but why is that extra yud there? And from this, our sages learn out that there's two possibilities. They're not going to agree. There's not going to be a final point being made here, but there's two main possibilities, two streams of thought on this. One is that this refers to the fact that we were created male and female, right? So when God made the human, he made them male and female. Or it could refer to that when God made the human, he made within the human both a good inclination and an evil inclination, right? And this is something the animals don't have, right? The animals follow their instinct. They do what they do. They may have to kill another animal to eat it or to protect its territory, or even just because, an animal might become enraged. Really, but it's really more of a territorial instinctive thing. But what we don't have is moral creatures, right? The only moral creature is the human. So the human has a choice between following its good inclination or its evil inclination. And so one of the possibilities of that extra yud, that unusual spelling of Vayitzer, to form, to make, when God made the human with two inclinations. But for the one that said no, it actually refers to the fact that God created them male and female. And so this is a little bit of a difference of opinion between Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Eliezer, who says male, female, versus Rav Nachman, the son of Rachista, who says, no, this is about the two inclinations that a human has, right? Now, if it's male and female, if the human was made somehow dual, like it is dualistic, male and female, but then they ask, well, what about the rest of the story where it says that he created the man first and then created the female from an appendage of the male? Normally when we hear that story in the culture, we say, oh, the woman was created from the rib of the man. But rib is not really a good translation. Let's just say the woman is made from a piece of a man or from an appendage of the man. In this case, it's really like the man was created from dirt, right? And then taking a small piece of this already living organic matter, the female was made using that as the clay, and it's a new and independent creation. In that line of thinking, the female really is the climax of creation. If you think about God first made, the water and the dirt, and eventually like the plants and the one-celled creatures, and then the fishes and the birds and the mammals, and it's sort of climbing up the ladder of beauty and complexity. And it's only when you reach the final creation, as it were, that God has reached the climax of creation, and that's the woman, the female. So she is really the most perfect creature. And we'll see in the Talmud that even though there's many patriarchal perspectives about the roles of men and women, generally speaking, the sages of the Talmud look at a woman as instinctively holier than the man, right? A woman is a little bit closer to God, a little bit less likely to be ruled by the bodily functions, a little less likely to sin. And of course, the great story that proves that is that the sin of the golden calf, the women did not participate in that. They were innocent of that sin. It was the men of Israel who led us into that terrible, terrible sin in our history. But according to the view that actually the human was created male and female, so some of our sages read that as meaning that the original creature was both male and female, and literally male on one side and female on the other, and that when God created woman, what he actually did was split this creature in two and made it two incomplete halves. And that's why we have the teaching that the male and the female are always sort of searching for the missing half, as it were. And this is where the concept of soulmates perhaps comes from. If, however, you go with this interpretation, you see how the sages sort of follow out. Well, if you say that God created male and female together as one creature and then split them out, but then how do you read the sentence where God took this piece from the man and built a woman out of it? If the woman was essentially already created as one half of that first male-female creature, so what would it mean that he built or fashioned the woman from the piece that was taken from the man? And here our sages answer, what that word built or fashioned means in that situation is not that he sort of built a new creature from scratch, but rather, and this is so gorgeous, it's the same verb as to braid, right? So it's not that God built the woman from the piece, but rather, having separated the woman from the man, braided her hair, right? He braided her hair in order to present her back to the man. And so here we have this beautiful kind of image of God, just so tender and loving these two new creatures, these fresh new creatures who are, just so naive and vulnerable in the world, but they were made for each other, the man and the woman. And God sort of prepares, and the woman is going to be the one that's more, visually appealing to the other creature, and the man is going to offer, perhaps the strength and the ability to support. God separates the two creatures, but they're going to have a role to play. One is going to be more the provider, the other one is going to be the child, the one who's bearing children, and he's going to make the female more beautiful than the male, and braids her hair in order to prepare them, for the first chuppah, the first wedding, as it were. And you can almost imagine God so excited about these two new creatures, and God can see the future, but at this moment, God is just in the present, kind of in the garden, putting them together for each other. Johanna just said, is that why the Havdalah candle is braided? I don't know. I never thought about that. The Havdalah candle has to have 2 wicks. I don't know if it's related to braiding the hair, but I just love this image of God kind of excited to put these 2 creatures together and celebrate the first love, the first wedding, as it were. Okay, and then we also have a teaching that goes along with that. In this first wedding, right, God braids Eve's hair, right, to prepare her for Adam, and God acts as Adam's best man, right? So he's going to be the best man. God is the best man at the wedding. And the role of the best man in ancient times was actually far more complicated than now. It's not just the guy who stands next to the groom and hands him the ring, right? In Talmudic times, the best man was a very, very dear friend. I mean, we still have that idea, but he would take care of everything, right? The groom, he just keeps learning Torah, preparing himself for the spiritual union that he's going to have with the bride. And the best man takes care of all the wedding arrangements, pays for it, hires the musicians, brings people together, does everything. And of course, the groom will then, later when the best man gets married, the roles will switch and the groom will be the best man for him. So here God was acting as the best man for Adam. And from this we actually learn out how important friendship is, right? Friendship is so important that you need to have a friend. We actually have that in Pirkei Avos as well. That you must have a friend. A man needs a friend. A person needs a friend. And if you're somebody of very lofty stature, like you're the king, or you're the CEO, you can't say to yourself, well, there's nobody really on my level, so I guess I can't have a friend. Because God acted as Adam's best man, right? You must find yourself a friend, and you must be so dedicated to friendship that you're willing to serve your friend, right? God was willing to serve as Adam's best man and to do everything that he could for Adam to have a successful wedding. And now, so now we're learning a little bit more about man and woman. So now Nachman Bar Yitzchak asks, okay, well, let's say that the male and the female were created as this kind of dual creature that was then split and turned into a separate male and female. Okay, so before the creature was split, when male and female were riding around in one body, right, unified, so Nachman Bar Yitzchak asked the question, well, which was the front and which was the back? When this creature walked, did it walk sideways, or which face was in front? And he says, well, the man walked in front, but his reason is interesting. It's not because, the man is more powerful and should be in authority. He says the reason that the man walks in front is because ultimately God knew that they would be separated. And if a man and a woman are walking somewhere, Nachman Bar Yitzchak says the man needs to walk in front or to the side, but not behind. Why? Because the man cannot be trusted to walk behind a woman and not look at her lasciviously, right? Nachman Bar Yitzchak is being just very realistic, let's say, or pessimistic about the moral stature of males, right? That a man who's visually oriented and just kind of more, enthralled by his own sexuality, more enslaved to his own inclinations, right? We started this conversation talking about the inclination, We went into that the human was created with two inclinations. We've been exploring the idea that actually meant that the human was created as male and female. But this is bringing us back around to the good and evil inclination. And the male is just more susceptible to the evil inclination. And Nachman Bar Yitzhak is saying that if a man is walking behind a woman, he's not going to keep his thoughts on Torah. He's going to look at the figure of the woman, and his thoughts will tend to, a non-spiritual, very physical type of place. And so therefore a man should avoid walking behind a woman so that his thoughts won't sink into the gutter. And likewise, our sages say that if a man is doing business, let's say he's a seller in the marketplace, right, and he's going to be dealing with people all day long, men and women, he should be careful when he's doing a business transaction with a woman that he's not counting money into her hand. And what he's saying is, by counting money into her hand, what they're saying is he's going to prolong the transaction, possibly even hold her hand just to put money in it. In other words, use just the niceties of regular interaction in society in an underhanded way, so that he can really view her as a sexual object and just, flirt with her, right? We should not be flirting in a way that is promoting lasciviousness. For our sages, the interactions between men and women are holy, and if they can't be kept, above board and on the level, then try to minimize that interaction. And our sages are just very mistrustful of men, right? Our sages trust women much more. Like, a woman will have an interaction with a man, and it'll be about the content of the interaction. They're doing business, they're sharing thoughts, they're talking philosophy, they're talking Torah. The woman will keep the conversation on the subject. The man's mind will, devolve into, more base thoughts and more base desires. So Rabbi Yochanan says, along these same lines, that it's better to walk behind a lion than behind a woman. What's he saying? He says, King David was able to defeat a lion in combat, but he was defeated by his own, salacious desire for a woman. This is the incident of Bathsheba, right? So King David is one of the holiest people who ever lived. I mean, he wrote the book of Psalms. His son built the temple, but really it was David that dedicated Jerusalem and collected everything that was necessary and set the scene for the building of the temple. And the Messiah will be a descendant of King David. And yet David was brought low by his own, base desire for the beautiful woman Bathsheba. And the sages will debate what was the sin of David. But even in the Bible, it says that the prophet said to David, you killed her husband. You sent her husband to the front line in the war so that you could have her for yourself. And it's a sin. Right? On the other hand, it is better to walk behind a woman than to walk behind idolatry. If an idol is being paraded down the street because you're in a culture where they worship idols, they already established how dangerous it is to walk behind a woman for a man's soul, but better you should walk behind a woman than behind an idol, lest you come to gaze on the idol or be seen as somebody that would bow to an idol. But as bad as it is to walk behind an idol, better that you should walk behind an idol than you should walk behind a synagogue when the people are praying inside. Right? So for our sages, that somebody would walk past a group of people praying in a synagogue and not go in, it's a tremendous degree of disrespect. You're saying that, that's not for me. Okay, the Jewish people are commanded to pray and they're praying, but not me. Right? You should not do that. According to our sages, that's sinking very low. However, this does not count if there's another synagogue in the town and people could think, oh, you're going to the other synagogue. They're not even saying that, they're not saying everybody must go in the synagogue. What they're saying is, don't show yourself to be so disrespectful of religion, even if it's not for you. Don't be so disrespectful of the faith of your ancestors as to make a show of not joining them, right? Don't make a show of separating yourself from your people, is what's being said. But because it's about appearance of impropriety, if there's another synagogue that you could be going to, then you don't have to worry about walking past the synagogue where people are praying. Or if you're riding a donkey, you can ride past it because your donkey's, you're going to go park your donkey. Or if you're carrying packages, you're not disrespecting the synagogue, you're just involved in a task. Or if you're wearing tefillin, so you're obviously a person that submits to God, you're not one who's going to make a show of disrespecting the faith. With that, we come back to the inclinations more directly. And Rabbi Yosei HaGalili says that there are people who are ruled by their good inclination. These are the righteous. And there are people who are ruled by the bad inclination. And these are the wicked. But most people are middling people. And there's no surprise there. Most people are middling. They're neither ruled entirely by their good inclination nor entirely by their bad inclination, right? The Yetzer HaTov, the good inclination, or the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Rabbah said, I'm a middling person, right? So Rabbah was the teacher of Abaye. Just recently, we had a whole long story about Rava and Abaye. Rabbah was a teacher of Abaye, and he was a great, great, and very pious and very beloved sage. And Rabbah said about himself, yeah, I'm one of the middling. I'm just a middling person. And Abaye, his student, said, if you're a middling person, then there's no hope for the rest of us, because we all view you as among the righteous, the utterly righteous in this world. And it's a good lesson. We're all striving to be better. We're all basically in the middle. It's very rare in this world that we'll meet an utterly righteous person or an utterly wicked person. And because we're all middling, we have work to do, right? We have a lot of work to do in this world. Rava said that this world was built for the wicked. What? What he meant by that is that this world is a reward for the wicked, meaning that the righteous, or those who tend toward righteousness, right, they will have their reward not in this world, but in the next world. The next world is for the righteous, right? The wicked will have fun in this world. They'll have a reward in this world. But what kind of a reward is it really? This world is so finite. The soul is eternal. So if you're not going to have a reward in the next world, if your reward is only in this world, then that's a sad fate, and that is the fate of the wicked. And see how this is a very different conception than what we see in the culture, right? The idea of heaven and hell. Good going to the good place, the wicked going to hell to burn eternal damnation. The Jewish idea is quite different than that. It's more like the wicked are going to write themselves out of the real story. This world, right? You just have a short life here. And if you're only going to have a reward in this world, that means that when you leave this world, you go nowhere. You're done. But for the vast majority of us, we'll go on, right? If we've got a bunch of sins to atone for, and we weren't able to atone for them in this world, so we'll go to Gehenna, a place where we'll be purified, or we'll return to this world and have additional lifetimes. That's beyond the scope of this page 61. But this idea, right, that there's many different places in the world to come, high, low, in between, ways to purify, ways to go on with the story. What we've got to avoid is writing ourselves out of the story. Right? Okay. Rabbi Eliezer said that when it says in the Shema, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. He says, well, we understand what it means, all your heart. Right? That means really cultivating a love of God. But all your soul and all your might are added there to be realistic with people. Not everybody's going to develop an absolute love of God in their heart. So these are additional teachings, as it were, for two different kinds of people. According to Rabbi Eliezer, some people prioritize everyone is into their stuff, okay? Everyone's oriented about themselves. Everyone is selfish in some regard. So God is saying to you, okay, if you're all about your body, right? You're a person who's obsessed with the pleasures of the body, right? Looking good, feeling good, being healthy, being buff, dressing yourself, having pleasures, going on vacations, like just everything that is treating you, your body. Well, you have to love God with your body. And that's what it actually means to love God with all your soul. Some people actually prioritize their property over their body. They're all about the bank account, the business, having security in this world by building up their assets. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying, okay, for that kind of person, you have to be willing to love God with all your assets, right? If you're body oriented, you need to train yourself to love God with your body, meaning show up, be there for others, use your body as a tool for good the way God would want you to. But if you're a person who's all about your assets, so then use your assets to do God's will. Give to charity and until it hurts, right? Give to good causes until it hurts. That's according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva has a different definition of what it means to love God with all your soul. For Rabbi Akiva, it means even if it costs you your soul. What would that mean? Rabbi Akiva always wondered, what would it mean to love God with all your soul? He didn't really understand it. But unfortunately, he finally came to understand it at the end of his life. The great Rabbi Akiva lived in a time of very harsh persecution in the wake of a rebellion against the Roman authority that ruled over Israel at that time. There was something called the Bar Kokhba rebellion, a very ill-advised rebellion against Rome, led by a guy named Bar Kokhba. And in its wake, Rome came down hard on the Jews in Israel. And one of their vicious decrees against the Jews was no more Torah, right? No more Torah learning, no more Torah classes. So they just said nobody can teach Torah to the people because they viewed that as a political act against Rome. But Rabbi Akiva kept teaching. So one of his colleagues came by when Akiva was teaching Torah in public and said, Akiva, what are you doing? They've said they will kill people who are teaching Torah in public. You're risking your life. And Akiva answered with a parable. It's a famous Talmudic parable. It's here on page 61 of Berachos. And he says, a fox was walking by the river and he saw a bunch of fish in the river swimming back and forth very fast. And the fox said, fish, my friends, why are you darting back and forth it seems so anxiously? And the fish said, because they're casting nets into the river and we don't want to be caught in the net. So the fox says, your ancestors and my ancestors used to hang out together up here on land. Why don't you come up on land and we'll live together in peace and you won't have to run away from the nets that are being thrown into the river to try and kill you. And the fish answered, silly fox, if when we're in the river we're in danger, but at least we're swimming in water, which is our element and which protects us and gives us life, shall we now come up on land, in the air, outside of our element and be in much more danger just because it seemed a little dangerous here in the water? Where up there we would be assured to, here we're risking death. Up there we would certainly die. And what Akiva meant by that was it is risky to learn and teach Torah now, but Torah is our life. And if we were to stop learning and teaching Torah, then we'd lose it all. It wouldn't be worth living in this world because a Jew without Torah is nothing, according to Akiva. So he kept teaching, and he was arrested by the Roman authorities. And then he became one of the famous 10 martyrs who was not only killed, but he was executed in a very public and very painful way. I mean, his skin was actually raked by iron combs, flayed off his body. Terrible, terrible suffering. And as he was suffering the agony of his death, his students said, "Why, teacher? Why? Why not just? Why don't you just do what they said?" And he explained, all my life I wondered what it would mean to love God with all my soul. And now that I have a chance to fulfill this mitzvah, now I'm loving God with all my soul, which for Akiva meant even if he takes your soul. Right? And indeed, we are commanded. If somebody said, teach Torah and I'm going to kill you, we're not commanded to stop, But there's only three things that we're commanded to accept death for. If somebody says, murder someone else or I'm going to kill you, you have to accept to be killed. If they say, go rape a woman or I'm going to kill you, you have to accept to be killed. And if somebody says, go serve an idol, commit idolatry, betray God and your love of God, or I'm going to kill you, I think the opinions are a little bit divided. Here it says in the Quran that according to Rambam, you are commanded to martyr yourself. I've also heard the opinion that it's more you're permitted to martyr yourself, but if you can fake it, not really commit idolatry, but you could do that to save your life, you can do that. That's unclear. I don't want to teach that wrong. The basic teaching here it says that you are supposed to, according to Rambam, if you're told to kiss an idol or bow to an idol, you should accept being killed instead of doing it. But at any rate, Akiva would not stop teaching Torah because he thought that was the most important thing, and he accepted the risk. Right? That was for him. He's at such a high and holy level. And so as they were torturing him, and he gave his soul for God and for Torah, and as he was reaching the very end, he was able to do what is sort of a Jew's hope, that no matter what the circumstances are when we die, we hope that at the moment of our death, we will be saying Shema. We will be accepting the yoke of heaven and saying, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And literally, as Akiva said one, the final word of that line, his soul left his body. And the people who were witnessing this and crying heard a heavenly voice say, Happy are you, Akiva, that your soul left your body as you said one. Your place in the world to come is, the highest. Not just he has a place in the world to come. Many people have a place in the world to come. But Akiva's place would be among the very highest, right? Right at the side of the Holy One. That's it. That's what I wanted to share today. It's a kind of sad place to end, but but for Akiva, it was a life perfectly lived. That was the ending, that perhaps Akiva would have chosen. He says he would have, right? I mean, he would have rather keep teaching Torah so that he could keep completing those mitzvahs. And I guess, just a slightly related thought, I will say this. I recently heard from my friend Nat Rubin, why is it important to eat healthy, right? To avoid smoking cigarettes, to take care of yourself, right? Not everybody who's religious pays attention to that sort of thing. But if, for example, you said to somebody when they got to heaven, hey, why didn't you keep Shabbos for 14 years? And it was a really religious person. He said, what are you talking about? I always kept Shabbos. I didn't miss keeping Shabbos for 14 years. But then they said to him in the heavenly court, what are you talking about? If you had taken care of your body, if you hadn't smoked cigarettes, if you had eaten properly, if you had exercised, you would have lived 14 years longer, and you would have been able to perform all those mitzvahs. Why didn't you take it seriously? And when you hear it that way, life is such a precious thing that we don't throw away our lives for anything, not for any principle, except for those big three, right? You don't commit idolatry, you don't go rape somebody, you don't have a forbidden sexual union, and you don't murder. Anything else, right, you prioritize your life. That's it. Further takeaway from today's class is this beautiful idea that, according to our sages, we're always wrestling. We're all middling people wrestling with our evil inclination, trying to cling to the good and avoid the bad. And that is a lifelong task, a job that never ends, is never perfected, is never mastered. And the higher we go in that effort, the more susceptible we become to falling at any time. So it requires eternal vigilance to be a warrior for your soul. Thank you, my friends, for listening today. With God's help, I'll be back on the West Coast tomorrow and connecting with you again at some point to study page 62. All the best.